First Baptist Church. How y'all doing this evening? It's cool in here, so you should be doing pretty good, right? See? All right, if you would stand. We're going to sing Victory in Jesus this evening. I want y'all to sing it out with me. This next one, I really love this song. We were talking about it, Mark and I were talking about it. It's one of our favorite songs to do. And whenever we do it, we kind of tend to get nervous because whenever you really love a song and and you want people to hear what it has to say, and you want it to speak to them, and you know that if you mess it up, that's what they're going to be thinking about, and not the song. So don't pay any attention to us. Just sing the words of the song and worship with us this evening. Justice has been satisfied. He will hold me fast. Raise with him to endless life. He will hold me fast till our faith is turned to sight. When he comes at last, he will hold me fast. He will hold me fast. For my Savior loves me so. He will hold me fast. He will hold me fast. He will hold me fast. For my Savior loves me so. For my Savior loves me so. For my Savior loves me so. He will hold me fast. Amen. All right, you can be seated.
All right. I'm glad you're here tonight. Open your Bibles with me to the book of Ezra. We are in Ezra chapter 4. We're going to look at 4 through 6 tonight because, again, it's a unified story. And we're going to look at a couple of letters. We're going to look at a couple. When was the last time you handwrote a letter? Can you think of the last time you handwrote somebody a letter? Last week. Wow. Wow. Really? Wow, I'm impressed. Oh, really? Yeah, that'll count. I might put in a line or two on a birthday card, but handwriting a letter, I haven't done that in a long time. So we're going to look at a couple of letters tonight. They're interesting letters written to the king, and his response as well. and what it meant for the people of Israel. It is important, and it's very interesting, this interaction that went back and forth. Ezra chapter 4, from the moment of their return, most of their opposition from the mixed population of the land, who really didn't want them inhabiting Jerusalem, or rebuilding the temple. Opportunity and opposition often go together, and the greater the opportunity, often the greater the opposition. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 16:9, this is Paul speaking here. For a great and effective door has opened to me, and there are many adversaries. Is that not true? Is that when you try to do something substantial, when there is tremendous opportunity, there is tremendous opposition just seems to show up? Well, that's what happens tonight. Ezra chapter 4, verse 1. When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and to the heads of the families and said, "Let us help you build, because like you, we seek your God and have been sacrificing to him Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." But Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the rest of the heads of the families of Israel answered, "You have no part with us in building no part with to our God. We alone will build it for the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, commanded us." Interesting statement right there. They go back. They go back in 445, start to rebuild the wall. This is really the discussion. This is rebuilding the temple. And as the temple, they're getting ready to rebuild the temple, build the temple. People showed up, and it was the same with Nehemiah. If you remember the great opposition to building the wall, which Nehemiah led the Israelites. Nehemiah led these 2 days, 52 days. Were the people around? They were already living there. And so when they returned to Jerusalem, there were people living all around, people in all of the communities around. It had been for many years. Where did these people come from? Well, we do know that there were some stragglers that never off to Babylon. They remained there. Now, there were a group of people that remained. They killed the governor. I think his name was Gedaliah, and then they hightailed it down to Egypt, and that's where Jeremiah was, and he went with them against his will and ended up dying down in Egypt. But there were stragglers, but mostly, if you remember, the northern 10 tribes in Israel, which is most of Israel. This is down in the southern kingdom of Judah. It's all the promised land, and the northern 10 tribes, the bulk of Israel, was from the north, those 10 tribes, and the capital city was Samaria. And in 722, the Assyrian king came and he took them and hauled them back to Assyria and spread them out all over the place so they couldn't band together and form a revolt. Well, not only did he displace them and move them up in other places, when he conquered other kingdoms, he would displace those people and some down to Israel. And so they're displaced from their homes, and they've settled in now and made homes for themselves. And so there's this interesting mishmash of cultures and religion that's going on, and they're the inhabitants that are there. So they show up, and it says in verse 1, when the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were building a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and the heads of the families and said, "Let us help you build, because like you, we seek your God and have been sacrificing to him since the time of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here." Now, I don't know, let's say he's telling you the truth. I don't know where, which I don't think he was, but I don't know where he's making sacrifices, because the temple and the altar and everything have been destroyed. So he doesn't explain where and how they've been sacrificing, but he's basically saying, hey, we're ready to volunteer. We're on your side. We're one of your group. And he, of course, doesn't agree with that. The Samaritans ultimately did not worship the true and living God, for they had feared the Lord, yet served their own gods. We saw that in 2 Kings chapter 17, for example, and that's a direct quote from there. Why was the Samaritan offer so dangerous? Why not just let them help? Can you tell me why? I mean, everybody likes free labor. Why not let them help? What's wrong in that? Yes. So they start helping, and then they get to know each other. They're fellow laborers. And before you know it, their sons and daughters are meeting each other, and everybody's going over to everybody's house, and they start intermarrying with them. And very quickly, within just a few years, they would be right back where they were before the Exodus. And I'll give the Jews credit for this one thing. They did finally figure that out. They did learn this lesson, and were determined not to do that. And we're going to see later on that there are steps that they took, pretty extreme steps, in fact, to make sure that they were separated from those that were around them and did not intermarry. It was contrary to the law of Moses, by the way. They weren't supposed to intermarry. And Israel was a nation that was set apart from other nations because God had given them a special task to perform to the world. We see this in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 through 3. And in verse 3, if you remember Genesis chapter 12, verse 3 says that all the nations of the world, all the people of the world would be blessed through Israel. Remember that? That's ultimately the promise that God gave Abraham in his covenant with him, that all the people in the world, the entire planet, would be blessed because of the Israelites. And of course, you and I know that that happened through the birth of Jesus Christ. And so God is determined that they're going to keep that bloodline pure and keep their spiritual purity as the Israelites until at least the day of Christ. Verse 4, then the peoples around them set out to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid to go on building. They hired counselors to work against them and frustrate their plans during the entire reign of Cyrus, king of Persia, and down to the reign of Darius, king of Persia. At the beginning of the reign of Xerxes, they lodged an accusation against the people of Judah and Jerusalem. So Cyrus is no longer the king. Memory serves, he's dead at this point. So they get another king. His name is Xerxes. And then there's another king after him called Artaxerxes. So at the beginning, verse 6, at the beginning of the reign of Xerxes, they lodged an accusation against the people of Judah and Jerusalem. These are the people that live there, and they're lodging an accusation. Verse 7, and in the days of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Bishlam, Mithridates, Tabeel, and the rest of his associates wrote a letter to Artaxerxes. The letter was written in Aramaic script, in the Aramaic language. Rehum, the commanding officer, and Shimshai, the secretary, wrote a letter against Jerusalem to Artaxerxes, the king, as follows. Rehum, if I'm saying that correctly, Rehum, the commanding officer, and Shimshai, the secretary, together with the rest of their associates, the judges and officials over the men from Tripolis, Persia, Erech, and Babylon, the Elamites of Susa, and the other people whom the great and honorable Ashurbanipal deported and settled in the city of Samaria, elsewhere in Trans-Euphrates. And so that's who put them there, was Ashurbanipal, who deported them and put them there in Israel. Verse 11, this is a copy of the letter they sent him. To King Artaxerxes, from your servants, the men of Trans-Euphrates. The king should know that the Jews who came up to us from you have gone to Jerusalem and are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They are restoring the walls and repairing the foundations. Furthermore, the king should know that if this city is built and its walls are restored, no more taxes, tribute, or duty will be paid, and the royal revenues will suffer. Now, since we're under obligation to the palace, and it's not proper for us to see the king dishonored, we are sending this message to inform the king, so that a search may be made in the archives of your predecessors. In these records, you will find that this city is a rebellious city, troublesome to kings and provinces, a place of rebellion from ancient times. That is why this city was destroyed. We inform the king that if this city is built and its walls are all restored, you will be left with nothing in Trans-Euphrates. The king sent this reply to Rehum, the commanding officer, Shimshi, the secretary, and the rest of their associates living in Samaria and elsewhere in Trans-Euphrates. Greetings. The letter you sent us has been read and translated in my presence. I issued an order, and a search was made. And it was found that this city has a long history of revolt against kings and has been a place of rebellion and sedition. Jerusalem has had powerful kings ruling over the whole of Trans-Euphrates, and taxes, tribute, and duty were paid to them. Now issue an order to these men to stop work, so that this city will not be rebuilt until I so order. Be careful not to neglect this matter, while let this threat grow to the detriment of the royal interests. Well, isn't that interesting? I'll get to verse 23 in just a moment, but look here just a minute. They write this letter to the king, and the king falls for it. Of course, they don't have any evidence to back up their claim. Their implication in the letter, or the accusation, is that the Jews are going to stop paying any tribute or tax, and they're going to be a problem again. And they say, they have a long history of being difficult, which, of course, is that true? Oh, yeah. And the king just believes it, buys the whole thing. Verse 23. As soon as the copy of the letter of King Artaxerxes was read to Rehum and Shimshai, the secretary and their associates, they went immediately to the Jews in Jerusalem and compelled them by force to stop. So they're emboldened now because they got the permission of the big king. So in the 7th year of Artaxerxes, this is the king, the Persian king Artaxerxes, which was 458 to 457, Ezra took a group of liberated Jewish exiles to Jerusalem to start the rebuilding of the city. Eastern rulers depended on their local officials to act as spies and report anything suspicious. Rehum, the officer in charge, conferred with the other officials and decided that the rebuilding of the city was a threat to the peace of the empire. And I think, bless you, I think that they're just not too happy because they weren't invited to the party. So he dictated a letter to Shimshai, the scribe, and had it sent to the king. Rehum gave 4 reasons why the king must order the Jews to stop rebuilding Jerusalem. First, history showed that Jerusalem was indeed a rebellious and wicked city. Unfortunately, was this true? Yes, it was true. They were difficult. And if I can say to this day, they're pretty ornery. I love them to death. I go every other year. I love being there. And I often say this, we love them a lot more than they love us. And they are shrewd business people as well. And sometimes they can come across rather difficult. And they were very difficult then. And they were certainly wicked as well, which I don't know why they would care about whether they were wicked. So it was a fact that the Jews couldn't deny. If Jerusalem were restored, Rehum argued, it would rebel against the king, declare its independence, and as long as Jerusalem was in ruins, it was defenseless against the king's forces. So it makes logical sense. If I'm a foreign king, I don't want others rebuilding their city. There's one little thing that was left out of their complaint to the king. What was the little thing that was left out? Cyrus ordered all this. Now, not only did he order it, he said they would help them pay for it, and he gave them all the gold and silver dishes back for the temple. We'll get to that in a minute, but he leaves out in this letter, in these 2 letters, it's all been left out. They don't seem to know. He told a half-truth. That's right. He told a half-truth. Which a half-truth is what? Which a half-truth is a lie. That's exactly true. So that's exactly anyway. Okay, where was I? Okay, where are the four reasons? First, Jerusalem was first, and wicked city. Second, and independent Judah would mean the loss of Judah would contribute to the empire. Third, a successful Medium would also bring dishonor to the king. What king wants to have one of his own provinces successfully rebel against him? This might encourage other provinces to follow their example. And then finally, fourth, if the Jews succeeded in rebelling, they would no doubt conquer the entire Euphrates, and this would really hurt the king in his empire. That's the accusation. So the king's officers, and found proof the Jews found they've been ruled by Solomon, Josiah, Hezekiah, and also by rebellious. So Reham's accusations were correct. During the declining years of Judah, with broken trees, Syria, with Egypt, Babylon, had refused to pay tribute to its their own record. The king ordered the Jews to stop revolting. In fact, it's likely that the Persians had already completed. And the report that Nehemiah received described what the Persians had done, not what the Babylonians and what the Babylonians had done. Nehemiah rides a horse to the rubble of Jerusalem. I think he wept because he's thinking all that ruin. Because what may very well have happened that wasn't even done by the Babylonians, the Persians, when they heard this, when they were worthy. Anyway, verse 24. Thus the work on the house of God in Jerusalem came to an end in Jerusalem until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. This during the reign of Cyrus, during 559, who had given the Jews the right to return to the 536 temple. From 536 worked on crest, worked that crest, 6 or 7 years, they worked on it years. If they were 30, it stopped at 530, this edict, and did not resume until 520. So there's a 5-year period where Ezra, and everybody's there, but they're not allowed to work on anything officially for 10 years. And that's when Darius came. All right, Ezra chapter 5. It continues. Now Haggai the prophet, Zechariah the prophet, and Zechariah the prophet, prophesied to the Jews in Judah in the name of the God of Israel, who was over the God of Israel. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel, son of always get this. I'm dyslexic on this one word. It's Joseph. It's set to work to rebuild the house of God and to rebuild the house of God in Jerusalem with them. God were with them. So they got the A team here. They got Zerubbabel. They got Zerubbabel. There's and Ezra. But there they have Haggai and Zechariah. Yeah, and we're going to see from Haggai and Zechariah to these books that they're going to share with us. They're going to share perspective as well. Verse 3. At that time, up to Trans Euphrates and Shethar, Bozenai and Bozunai, and then Damascus. Who authorized you to rebuild this? Temple and restore this? Also asked, what are the names of the men constructing the building? Their God was watching over the elders of the Jews, and they were not stopped until reports could go to Darius could go and his written reply be received. So apparently, when the previous ruler died, the Jews just started quietly just rebuilding everything. And people showed up because they went to Jerusalem. They have a buy, and somebody happened to give them a report. I think there's construction going on in that town, and they go and who told you? They say, who told you? Start again. Verse 6. This is the copy of the letter that governor in the Trans Euphrates, center of the Trans Euphrates, and their associates, officials of Trans Euphrates, said to the king, report they sent, the report they followed, So here's the next letter. The king should know that we went to the district of Judah. We went to the temple of the great God. To the temple of the great God. Which I like that. I'd love to have a copy of this letter. Wouldn't it have a copy of this letter? To the temple of the great God. Temple of the great God. Building it with large stones and with large timbers and placing the work is being carried on with diligence and is making rapid progress under their direction. We questioned the elders and asked them, who authorized you to rebuild this temple and restore this structure? We also asked them their names. We also write down names so that the names of the leaders for your names are made leaders for your information. This is the answer they gave us. We are the servants of the God of heaven and of the God, and we are rebuilding the temple we were rebuilt many years ago. That was built many years ago. One that a great king of Israel built. But because the God of heaven, he handed them over to Nebuchadnezzar, the Chaldean, king of Babylon, who destroyed this temple and deported the people to Babylon. However, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree to rebuild this house of God. He even removed from the temple of Babylon the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple in Jerusalem and brought to the temple in Babylon. Then King Cyrus gave them to a man named Sheshbazzar, who he appointed governor. And he told him, take these articles and go and deposit them in the temple in Jerusalem and rebuild the house of God on its site. So this Sheshbazzar came and laid the foundations of the house of God in Jerusalem. Again, we think Sheshbazzar is Zerubbabel. From that day to the present, it has been under construction, but is not yet finished. Now, if it pleases the king, let a search be made in the royal archives of Babylon to see if King Cyrus did in fact issue a decree to rebuild this house of God in Jerusalem. Then let the king send us his decision in this matter. So they show up and they see that the construction is going on, and they ask the Jews, who authorized this and what are your names? Those are the two questions. Now, from that, he then writes a letter to the Assyrian king, to the Babylonian king, Persian king, Darius. And I'll give him credit. This guy who writes the letter says, we have a concern here. They're rebuilding, and I don't know who authorized this. But he does, in fairness, say, when I asked him these questions, who gave you the right to do this, and what are your names? This is their response. And he tells the king in his letter what their response is. That their response was, who gave them the permission? Cyrus gave them the permission to do that. He even gave them the goodies from the temple to take back, and he commanded that those be put back in the temple once the temple was rebuilt. And so their answer is to the king, the Babylonian king, you guys authorized it. It was your predecessor that authorized it. And so, again, to be fair to this third-party guy, he does write accurately their response to the king, and that brings us to Ezra chapter 6. So I was going to stop here, but you got to know the answer. The answer is it's the closure for the story. Does anybody have any comments or questions at this point, though? Yes. That's correct. Yes, he absolutely was. And we're going to see that God just overrules all of that. God had determined that the temple be rebuilt, and so it got rebuilt. But yes, the opposition was considerable. And can you imagine Ezra, as they're leading people back, he led all those people back, and they're starting and they're making progress. And they then had to stop, and they waited 10 years. I'm sure every year of that 10 years they're thinking, Lord, what's going on? We're just wasting away here. Nothing's happening. But God had his timing, and when he was ready, he had them move forward. So here's the response to the letter. Ezra chapter 6, verse 1. King Darius then issued an order, and they searched in the archives stored in the treasury at Babylon A scroll was found in the citadel of Ecbatana in the province of Media, and this was written on it. Again, would love to have this scroll. Memorandum, to whom it may concern, I guess. Verse 3, in the first year of King Cyrus, the king issued a decree concerning the temple of God in Jerusalem. Let the temple be rebuilt as a place to present sacrifices, and let its foundations be laid. It is to be 90 feet high and 90 feet wide, with 3 courses of large stones and 1 of timbers. The costs are to be paid by the royal treasury. Also, the gold and silver articles of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem and brought to Babylon, are to be returned to their places in the temple in Jerusalem. They are to be deposited in the house of God. Now then, Tattenai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shethar-Bozenai, that's a long name, and you, their fellow officials of that province, stay away from there. Do not interfere with the work of the temple of the Lord. And again, this is the new king saying this, not the old king. This is the new king, as a result of them finding that in their history. Do not interfere with the work in this temple of God. Let the governor of the Jews and the Jewish elders rebuild this house of God on its site. Moreover, I hereby decree what you are to do for these elders of the Jews in the construction of this house of God. The expenses of these men are to be fully paid out of the royal treasury from the revenues of where? Trans-Euphrates, that's the guys who wrote the letter. That is, don't bother them, don't stop them, but I do want you to pay for it. So that the work will not stop. Whatever is needed, young bulls, rams, male lambs for burnt offerings to the God of heaven, and wheat, salt, wine, and oil, as required by the priests in Jerusalem, must be given them daily without fail, so that they may offer sacrifices pleasing to the God of heaven and pray for the well-being of the king and his sons. The edict that's coming from the king, apparently he had sons, and he's thinking, he's a smart guy. He realizes, okay, this was already ordered by Cyrus, and so I'm going to go with it, and just in case this God has power, put in a good word for me and the boys as well while you're at it. Smart guy, again, smart guy. Verse 11, furthermore, I decree that if anyone changes this edict, a beam is to be pulled from his house, and he's to be lifted up and impaled on it. And for this crime, his house is to be made a pile of rubble. May God, who has caused his name to dwell there, overthrow any king or people who lifts a hand to change this decree or to destroy this temple in Jerusalem. I, Darius, have decreed it. Let it be carried out with diligence. Now, this is kind of hard for us to wrap our head around, because in our country, this is the way that we do it. You have a president that goes in there for 4 years or 8 years. He makes all kinds of decisions, appoints all kinds of people, and billions of dollars of official orders. What do they call it? Executive orders, where they just bypass Congress. And they do all of these things, and they do all of this appointing and all of these things, and then they're gone. A new president comes, if he's from another party, and the first thing he does is to undo everything the previous president did. That's how we do it. That's America. I don't know why. I mean, it just is the way that it is here. And they go in and they just pretty much systematically clean house. And so if your president lost the election and you're working in Washington, D.C., your job is over, because somebody from the other political party is going to replace you. But that's not how they did it then. And you're right. Cyrus had made that law, that edict, he declared that. And it was not, even though he's long dead, he could have said, he dead, that was 2 generations ago, I can do anything I want. He didn't do that. As soon as he found out it was an official decree from the king, from Cyrus, that was the decree. And he not only allowed it, he then embraced it. And God saw to it that his house was rebuilt. So, and then anyone who disobeyed the new edict was to suffer a horrible fate. He was to be impaled on a beam taken from his own house, and then his house was to be demolished. Execution by impaling was practiced in the Assyrian and Persian empires. It's a terrible way to die. Darius wanted no disturbance in this part of his vast kingdom. The pagan king acknowledged that God had caused his name to dwell at Jerusalem. Darius probably thought that Yahweh thought of Yahweh as a local deity, which is what they usually did, whereas Ezra, in recording that statement, knew of the covenantal significance in God's name dwelling in Jerusalem. So, Tattenai's inquiry backfired. Have you ever had someone tattle on you, and then they get in trouble for tattling? I remember when I was a kid, I had 4 brothers and sisters, and they were all pretty rotten, you know. We were all redheaded and ornery. And when Mom came home or Dad came home, it was a foot race to see who could tattle first, because the belief was, if I'm the first to tattle, even if we're all guilty, if I'm the first to tattle, then they're the target. And so that's what this guy did apparently, and it didn't go very well. Not only did he have to let it all proceed right in front of him, and he couldn't do anything about it, he had to help pay for it out of his revenues. So I found that interesting. All right, verse 13. Then because of the decree King Darius had sent, Tattenai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shethar-Bozenai and their associates carried it out with diligence. So the elders of the Jews continued to build and prosper until the preaching of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah, a descendant of Iddo. They finished building the temple according to the command of the God of Israel and the decrees of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, kings of Persia. The temple was completed on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, or Adar, however you want to pronounce that, in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. Then the people of Israel, the priests, the Levites, the rest of the exiles, celebrated the dedication of the house of God with joy. For the dedication of this house of God, they offered 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 male lambs, and as a sin offering for all Israel, 12 male goats, one for each of the tribes of Israel. And they installed the priests in their divisions, and the Levites in their groups for the service of God at Jerusalem, according to what was written in the book of Moses. And again, they obviously have a copy of the book of Moses. Verse 19, on the 14th day of the first month, the exiles celebrated the Passover. The priests and the Levites had purified themselves and were all ceremonially clean. The Levites slaughtered the Passover lamb for all the exiles, for their brothers, the priests, and for themselves. So the Israelites who had returned from the exile ate it, together with all who had separated themselves from the unclean practices of their Gentile neighbors, in order to seek the Lord, the God of Israel. For 7 days they celebrated with joy the feast of unleavened bread, because the Lord had filled them with joy by changing the attitude of the king of Assyria, so that he assisted them in the work on the house of God, the God of Israel. So a couple things you'll want to notice there, and then we'll finish for tonight. First of all, it was on the 12th day of the last month of the year 515 BC. So this is 2,500 years ago, a little more. The temple was completed about 70 years from the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians in 586. Now, as far as the grand history of Israel goes, that 70 years is a time since the time of Solomon's temple to Zerubbabel's temple was a relatively short. It's not like 800 years passed or anything. It was just one full generation, that 70 years. God had been faithful to care for his people. He provided encouragement through the preaching of the prophets and even used the authority and wealth of a pagan king to further God's work. Though there was no ark in the Holy of Holies and no glory filled the house. Did you notice that? If you remember with King Solomon, when he dedicated the temple, the glory of God came down, filled the temple. Remember that? Didn't happen this time. But there is something wonderful that happened. Did anybody catch this? If you were here last time, when they finished the construction on the foundation, there's a difference. What's the difference? So last time, everybody's hollering, and some are yelling because they're happy, and some were yelling because they were sad. And it's the old people above the age of 70 who remember Solomon's temple and Solomon's temple's foundation, look at this new foundation, and they realize this temple isn't going to be nearly the temple that Solomon had. And so they're wailing, they're crying, they're mourning because of that difference. There's no crying or mourning here. At this point, by this time, probably now, 10 or 15 years have passed, and so those people, most of them are all deceased at this point. There's just happiness. So it's a wonderful day. Even though they didn't see the glory of God descend into the new temple, they're very happy. Okay, where was I? When King Solomon dedicated the temple that he built, he offered so many sacrifices that they couldn't be counted. If you remember back in 1 Kings chapter 8, it says that he sacrificed so many animals they couldn't even keep count of them. Plus, he offered 142,000 peace offerings, which were shared with the people. That's the ones who could be counted, the 142,000. The Jewish remnant offered only 712 sacrifices, but God accepted them. Most important, they offered 12 male goats as sin offerings, one for each tribe, because they wanted God to forgive their sins and give them a new beginning. And it was a new beginning, by the way. I'm happy to say that this doesn't all peter out in 10 years, that they're all building false altars and following false gods within just a generation. It is a new beginning for Israel at this point. They weren't perfect, but it was definitely a turning point. Joshua, the high priest, also consecrated the priests and the Levites for their ministry in the completed temple. The temple, because it's such a large complex, and the courtyards around the temple and the sacrificial system that took place there on the altar just outside the temple in the temple courts. It is a complicated thing. I mean, when you're butchering that many animals and constantly doing sacrifices, and when the burnt offerings, the blood and the gravy as the animal cooks on the fire goes down in all these troughs, and there's this basin. I mean, there's a lot going on. You can't just, even if you grill something out on your grill, there's quite a few things you need to do. I can imagine this scale. And when you think about it, it's so tiny compared to what Solomon did, but 712 sacrifices. Can you imagine sacrificing, cutting open and gutting and cooking 712 whole animals? Goats, bulls, sheep. I mean, my goodness. Of course, I didn't grow up in a plant where they slaughter animals. I don't know, what do they call that? Slaughterhouse. And so maybe they do that many every day, but it seems like a lot to me. But they had to have a lot going on, and everybody had to do their part. The Levites and the priests, they all needed to be there and organized, and all of that was done. And so now it has started again. All right, any comments or questions? I have to look that up. I'm assuming, but I don't remember. Does anybody remember? It's a good question. I didn't run across that one way or another, but he's 2 generations. It was Xerxes. So it was Cyrus, Xerxes, Artaxerxes, and then Darius. Yeah. Okay, let's conclude our Bible study there. We'll take up again next week right there. And if you would,